Well, so you got a little a flag lesson there this morning, which is a little bonus on this holiday weekend. That's why I called this sermon A Tale of Two Flags. My home church displayed these same two flags, and on this Independence Day, we pause to commemorate important dates in our nation's history, don't we? This is certainly one of them. And also we reflect on how our faith and service to our country are often intertwined in our history, our thinking, and how one aspect influences another. Our scriptures reflect this ongoing relationship as well, and the tension that sometimes exists that is as old as God's original covenant with Abraham and with the people of Israel, who sought for God to provide them with a king, because they thought they should have a king like all the other nations around them, even those that didn't have a relationship with their God. That is how Saul became the first king of Israel in the ancient world. Now, Jesus' words in the temple as he held up a Roman coin, the coin of the realm, and challenged the listeners who were challenging his authority to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Those are some of the most succinct expressions of this long-standing tension between people's faith struggle with the times that they navigate in their lives, with the power structures that be. And Jesus was trying to help people understand what they were obligated to do for who. Our time is no different than Jesus' time. We feel some of those same tensions and same questions. And the question, of course, with what Jesus said is always, which things are Caesar's and which things are God's? And we need to pay attention to the entirety of Jesus' words and ministry to help us discern that. The answers aren't always easy. Well, this morning I've chosen a couple of patriotic hymns to begin and end the service, and they are favorites of mine in understanding the relationship of faith and country. One of my very favorite memories of singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic is as a junior high and then a high school student in the choir at Irving Junior High and then at Lincoln Southeast High School. We used to sing once a year a big concert and it was called the Choral Festival. It was held at Pershing Auditorium, and there were literally hundreds and hundreds of junior high and high school kids sitting in the arena in our choir robes. And we had all rehearsed the same several magnificent songs, which we sang in four-part harmony. And we always ended with the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And it had this grandiose arrangement that was like none other that I'd ever heard. Mrs. Johnson, who was our accompanist at Irving Junior High School, also happened to be the accompanist for this concert. She was really good. And the way she played the Battle Hymn of the Republic was just inspiring. And to hear it all was gorgeous. And we had this four-part harmony and this beautiful accompaniment, and then we get to the fourth verse, the part that says, "In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me." And the director would always have us sing that verse a cappella. And we go from this very, expressive, gung-ho kind of volume to a really soft and reverent volume. And then, of course, you had the finale, the very last verse. It was a really moving experience. And the other great memory I attach to this is that when my friend Topher Hansen, that I'd gone to high school with, his mother Lois was passing. I think I might have told this story once before, but her 4 children took care of her, and they sang for her often around her bed. And the night before she passed away, she asked them to sing again, and they said, "Well, what do you want to hear, Mom?" And they had all been in the choral festival too with the Lincoln Southeast High School Choir, and she knew they could do the 4-part harmony, so she said, "Battle Hymn of the Republic." Well, they knew all the verses, and they sang them all. And they were gorgeous. And at the end of it all, she said, "Again." And so they sang all 5 verses again. And then they asked her if she wanted to hear anything else, and she said, "Again." And so for a 3rd time, they sang the entire Battle Hymn of the Republic with that beautiful, reverent 4th verse. And when they finished the 3rd time around, she said, "That's good." And she died during that night. But I've always loved that they told that story at her funeral, and that was one of the ways that she was sung out of this world. So this Battle Hymn of the Republic always has lots of warm feelings for me. And of course it was born out of the time, the strife of the Civil War. And so we think about what was happening and what was tearing the country apart at that time. Now, in his letter to the early church, the Apostle Peter, who writes 3 letters that we have in the New Testament, he spoke to this relationship of tension between faith and civil life in his first letter. And it appears to have been one that was distributed to many of the early Gentile churches who were facing discrimination, even persecution, in the earliest days of the Jesus movement. Peter wrote these words, these epistles, to encourage these people, to keep them faithful, to support them in the face of some really serious opposition, sometimes violence. He wanted them to know that God would reward their suffering for a good cause. If they were being punished for doing something right, then God would reward them all the more. And they were being persecuted for the sake of spreading Jesus' good news of hope and salvation to a world that needed it so. It's important for us to understand those tensions of civic life and religious life. They echo throughout human history, many faiths, but our Christian faith as well. Turning back to Abraham Lincoln, when he was beginning to prosecute the Civil War, something he had dreaded and was afraid that it would come to him as soon as he was inaugurated, and it did. There were other people around him, others in leadership, who said it was important for us to remember that God was on our side. And Lincoln said, "That's not what I'm concerned about. My concern is whether we are on God's side." Quite a difference in that assessment. But that is the right question for us to ask in every circumstance. Not is God on our side, but are we on God's side? Are we taking the time to hear what God would want in this situation? What are the ways in which we are always called to be as Christians? And are we reflecting those values, those spiritual disciplines, those fruits of the Spirit in what we're doing? And if not, we need to wonder if we're on God's side or not. But that is the right question to ask, and that is Lincoln's assessment. That is Apostle Peter's assessment. And that too is Jesus' assessment. When he says, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." It is still a question that we must ask ourselves in times of turmoil just like we face today, in the church, in our civic life, in our nation, and our world. And as people of faith, as God's people, we need to constantly ask, whose side are we on? Amen.